if we have the tape available. If we do, we'll show it to you. You can see the second plane coming in from the right side of your screen, going into the tower itself. This is an extraordinary and troubling piece of tape. The Justice Department is now being evacuated. The second attack on the Trade Center occurred about a half an hour or so after the first one. We have a report, CNN has been told, that an American Airlines 767 jet was hijacked out of Boston today. We don't know which of
67 Boeing plane, and it was out of Boston. It was apparently hijacked from Boston. That was the first crash, and that happened just after 8 o'clock. The second crash that we've showed you quite a few times.
From the 56th floor. Do you have an idea of how far along the evacuation had gotten at the point the second tower came down?
Jim, I was trying to ask her that.
If they felt safe to be there, although I don't know what it looks like on the ground at that part of the city right now.
And Melissa, we would assume that what you are seeing in the way of preparedness at St. Vincent's is being repeated
by the smoke inhalation in and around the World Trade Center because of that second building falling in.
All right, Whitney, thanks very much. The problem's not just here in New York, as we've been reporting to you all morning long, and now word from the State Department, as it had already been evacuated because of what had happened here in New York City, that there's a possible explosion there as well. So quickly to recap the chronology as you look live at the scene of the one remaining tower of the World Trade Center. We had a plane crash from a plane hijacked out of Boston just before 9 o'clock. It hit Tower 1 of the World Trade Center. Then a second crash 18 minutes later. What we have heard from the Associated Press was a plane out of Newark. Then a third crash at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. and a fire at the Washington Mall. And now a fifth word that there was an explosion at Capitol Hill, which had since been evacuated. And now the sixth incident right now. The State Department apparently had been evacuated as all this was going on, only to find out that there's been a possible explosion there as well.
And Michael, I've been told by our guest here, Michael Hirschman, who's the president of an international security and counterterrorism firm, that there's an unidentified aircraft approaching an airport in Northern Virginia, possibly Dulles or Washington National Airport. Authorities there are scrambling to find out about that aircraft. An unidentified aircraft circling and approaching an airport in Northern Virginia. We're not sure which airport that is. You have Dulles there, you have Reagan International, and George, actually those are the two airports there, scrambling to find out the nature of that aircraft. Can you tell us any more, Mr. Hirschman?
Only that's an unidentified aircraft approaching Northern Virginia.
Okay.
What is it that that security can do at this point as they monitor that flight?
Well, my information, and of course all of this is unconfirmed. You can imagine the state of confusion right now. But my information is that they're scrambling jet fighters out of local military aircraft.
Michael, we'll come back to you in just a couple of moments. I hate to interrupt you. Let's go to Cindy Hsu, who's in the newsroom. She's got a further update. Cindy?
Okay, Michael, we have information from the Pentagon evacuation. General Richard Myers, Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said that prior to the crash into the Pentagon, military officials had been notified that another hijacked plane had been heading from New York area to Washington, and that's according to the AP. Also, we were talking about the State Department being evacuated, and it is because of a possible explosion or fire there. We're trying to get more information. And then locally here, we're hearing from Beekman Hospital that everyone has been called in, administrative, doctors, nurses, and that they are getting people from everywhere into that hospital. It's now called the NYU Downtown Hospital, and that's all we have here right now, Michael.
Sure, and along those lines, Cindy, every firefighter has been called in off vacation, called in off their days off to come in and help assist with this major, enormous nationwide tragedy here. So all firefighters have already supposedly been reported, have been called in, and hopefully as many firefighters as possible are helping assist with this, as in all doctors and nurses and hospital support staff.
A horrible situation all the way around, and a quick reminder for parents is there are schools in that area, in the financial district.
PS 84.
We have received word apparently that the students, though, in those schools are okay. That's what we're hearing, and we're also hearing that parents can How they get there at this point, we don't know, but can go get their children if you're able to get there. Obviously, the area is still very dangerous, so we caution you against taking any unnecessary action. However, if it's your child, we certainly
understand.
Yeah, we certainly would understand. But keep in mind that what you're seeing on your screen right now is live. This is not tape at all. This is the only remaining World Trade Center tower. The other collapsing not too long ago. Both victims of plane crashes. The tower rather that has collapsed, though we are told collapsed because of a third explosion. The source of that, though, at this point we don't know. Now let's go back to that story that you had mentioned a moment ago. There are 6 instances that we've been reporting. We have the crashes at the Trade Center, a crash at the Pentagon, a fire at the Washington Mall, and an explosion at Capitol Hill, as well as one at the State Department. And we just received late word of a suspicious plane.
Exactly. A suspicious plane approaching an airport in Northern Virginia.
To try and button up some of this, we had a report earlier that we now we believe we could tell you is not correct, that there was an explosion at the Capitol. There was none, as we now believe. There was no explosion at the Capitol. Air travel routed to Canada has been international flights going into the United States or into Canada, guys. Into the United States. International flights headed for the United States are being sent to Canada now, to airports there, as all air traffic in the United States has come to a halt. The FAA has shut down every...
That means there were 2 explosions, one of which was a car bomb. At this point, the AP only saying that there was an explosion outside the State Department. It was a car bomb, as we continue to keep close eye on all the events happening throughout the United States today.
New York City schools, we've just been told, are in lockdown. New York City schools are in lockdown, meaning, of course, that no child is going out anywhere. They're going to be remaining safe inside their schools. No doubt they have emergency plans in place, and they are implementing them right now. We do have our CBS 2 crews on their way. We have Rose Walia out at Bellevue Hospital. We had Whitney Casey at St. Vincent's Hospital. John Slattery was one of the reporters who was...
What we're going to do is we're going to turn back to the tower right here. We're going to send it back to you. And of course, what everybody is thinking is that our prayers are with the people who are in that tower. Back to you.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Get an update on the State Department real quick.
Apparently it was a car bomb that exploded outside the State Department. That's according to senior U.S. law enforcement officers. The State Department had been evacuated previous, apparently, to this bomb. So one can only assume that the people that were in that building got out safe and sound. We certainly hope that they did. Let's go to Walter Perez. Walter is downtown in Lower Manhattan.
Okay, now as you can imagine, Ralph, as you can imagine, it is a pretty frenzied scene out here. Just a few moments ago, I'd say about 20 minutes ago, we're not sure exactly what it was. We have not confirmed it, but something either exploded or fell off the side of the one building that was attacked and caused a massive plume of smoke. As we turn left, you can see there's a trucks go by that they are spitting off smoke. These were the emergency trucks and ambulances that were near the building at the time that had happened. At that point, it wasn't so much of a frenzied scenario because people were walking away from the building. This entire region has been cordoned off, and people who are working in nearby buildings were told to leave and evacuate the area for obvious reasons, for safety concerns. When that second plume of smoke came up from the ground area, people started running. People were covered in soot. There were people with blood on their shirts, rips in their shirts. And at this point, looking up at the top of the building at a rate of about 1 every 5 minutes, you see people that are jumping from the top of the building. It is an absolutely harrowing scene at this point. Police officials told us to evacuate the area that we were in. We moved about 2 blocks further, but the scene is very, very similar. Plumes of smoke all around the area, and people not exactly sure what's going on. All the telephone lines are jammed up as people are trying to communicate, not just police to other people, but folks who saw what happened, trying to communicate loved ones and let them know that they're safe. So it's a very hectic situation at this point. As we gather more information and we're sure we're settled where we're supposed to stop, we'll get back to you, because at this point, police are still not sure where we should be. And as you can see, a lot of police activity. They're trying to move the media to a safe area so we can do proper reporting and let everybody know exactly what's going on. For now, back to you.
Walter, have they given you any indication? I'm sorry, he can't hear me. All right. We simply do not know who has been hurt and what casualties might have occurred, which is the information that we are. I want you to take a look at what's happening right now. That is a live picture.
That's a live picture too. That's World Trade Center 2 has just collapsed.
That's the second of the towers to collapse.
We are now looking at the collapse of the second of the World Trade Towers.
For this city, for this country, many government offices in those towers. Amazing video as you're watching it now. It's not video, it's live. It's right before your very eyes.
The World Trade Center is gone, ladies and gentlemen.
Both buildings collapsing from apparent terrorist attacks. And we want to just take you through this. The first explosion happened right after 8 o'clock this morning. We're being told that a plane was hijacked from Boston Airport. It flew into the second tower of the
Let's get out of here, Ralph. We're going to leave because of smoke is coming right at us.
Obviously, this is a devastating
They're
moment
gone.
in our history.
They're gone. The World Trade Center is no more.
We do not know at this point the extent of injuries or casualties, how many people were in these buildings trying to get out. We've seen some gut-wrenching descriptions, witness accounts of people hanging out of windows, jumping, trying to get to safety.
You see the obvious.
Look at the plume.
All right, let's go to NBC News right now.
We are back at 10:30 Eastern Time on this Tuesday morning, this horrific, incredible, not to be believed Tuesday morning. You are looking at live pictures of the World Trade Center where just a few minutes ago, within the last minute actually, the second Twin Tower collapsed. Just to recap, if you're just joining us, around 8:42 Eastern Time this morning here in New York City, a plane crashed into the right Twin Tower of the World Trade Center about 2/3 of the way up the building, leaving a huge gaping hole, a huge fire, and tons of billowing smoke. About 25 minutes later, a second jet, believed to be a 727 or a 737,
some reports of a 757 even,
then crashed in the second Twin Tower. The first plane, incidentally, was en route from Boston, Massachusetts to Los Angeles.
Here's the video, I think, of the second plane striking the tower.
That's right. We're not sure the origin of that plane, is my understanding. The first plane that caused that hole on the right-hand side in the other Twin Tower was from Boston to LAX to Los Angeles. It was Flight 11, American Airlines. We have confirmed that that plane was hijacked. What happened following the hijacking is unclear. We should note that about an hour after the first collision at the Pentagon, reportedly another plane crashed into the Pentagon, which is just outside Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia. All air traffic has been stopped.
Government buildings have been evacuated, as have other buildings across the country. The Sears Tower in Chicago was evacuated. You can imagine that other buildings in major cities and small cities around the country are probably being evacuated as well.
There's an unconfirmed report of a car bomb at the State Department. We have not been able to pin that down. There is also, Jim Miklaszewski was told that there was an unconfirmed report of another air hijacking. We share this with you not in an attempt to in any way exacerbate what is already a terrible situation, but so much has come true today based on these earlier reports that we want you to have as much information as we can possibly get. At the Pentagon, all people outside were told to take cover just moments ago, but Jim Miklaszewski said the skies were clear.
There was an unconfirmed report of another hijacking with a plane headed towards Washington. Again, we don't want to sound alarmist, but that is something that Mick heard while he was at the Pentagon. We also want to mention that the president is en route from Longboat Key, Florida, where he was there to visit an elementary school to talk about literacy. Obviously, clearly, his agenda has changed dramatically. He will convene a meeting of the National Security Council as soon as he gets home. Colin Powell is also on his way back from Lima, Peru. He was scheduled to be in Bogota, Colombia.
And probably not at the White House. They'll probably take him to a safe location. There are a number of them, some in the hills of Virginia, as you know. And my guess is that Air Force One is in the unusual situation of having a fighter plane escort on its way back from Florida today. That's where we stand.
Think about the loss of life that we could have seen this morning. If you think about the fact that when full, the World Trade Centers hold about 50,000 people, no telling how many people were at work before 9 o'clock this morning and then shortly after 9 o'clock in the other tower. But if you look at this picture here, Tom and Katie, at Lower Manhattan, it appears that terrorists have succeeded this time in doing what terrorists tried to do back in 1993.
This is war. This is a declaration and an execution of an attack on the United States. two of our most conspicuous symbols of the American system of capitalism. The Pentagon, which of course is the headquarters of the most mighty military in the world, was attacked today as well. The White House has been evacuated. The State Department has been evacuated. Financial markets have been immobilized. All flights taking off after these attacks were grounded.
International flights have been sent to Canada.
It turns out it's transatlantic flights only going to Canada now. So there has been great chaos visited upon this country, to say nothing, as you pointed out, Matt, so importantly, of the still untold loss of life, and it's going to be horrendous. We don't know yet what the exact numbers are, but we can only tell you by looking at those pictures that you can guess as well as that we can, that there are going to be a lot of people who are not going to be able to escape that.
Back in 1993, when the bomb blew up in the basement of the World Trade Center, so many survivors talked about how long it took them, with no power in the elevators, to walk down the smoke-filled stairways. And you think about how many people were still trying to escape those buildings when first one and then the second tower collapsed.
And of course, the triage unit that has been set up, area hospitals are all receiving victims. And as Matt said, 50,000 capacity when everybody is in the building. But many people at 8:42 a.m. here in New York are at their desks, working in their offices. One young man or one man was reached by phone and was asked what is happening there, and he said, "We are blanking dying here."
Not to
and there
mention,
was screaming and yelling and pure chaos, understandably, going on in the background.
There's a picture of Lower Manhattan, ladies and gentlemen, the most important city in the world in so many ways. And now it has been attacked by terrorists at the World Trade Center, and the damage is beyond our ability to tell you in great detail.
Let me mention that,
I was going to say, here's what the president said. He canceled an education appearance in Florida. Here's what he said just a short time ago.
Governor Pataki, as well as Mayor Giuliani. So we assume that they are okay, though we ourselves have not heard official word from the mayor and from the governor, though we do expect to hear shortly, if it's at all possible, that they can update.
To get those ambulances to hospitals. Every hospital's emergency room is open and I'm sure working right now. And this is just a situation, it's like a war zone. And you have to logistically treat it like a war zone. You have to have your front lines, you have to have your support, and you have to have people who are constantly in there doing something. You know, I was also fire commissioner before I was police commissioner, and you know, it's no longer an issue, unfortunately, but a high-rise fire like that is almost impossible to fight.
At this point, would you say that every police officer, and there are what, 40,000?
We have 41,000
police officers in the city have been called in.
Oh, every one of them. I know every firefighter has been called in.
And how many firefighters?
There are 14,000 firefighters, and I'm sure we'll be getting help with equipment from our adjoining communities as well. I mean, this is a logistical exercise that makes the first attack on the World Trade Center, you know, relatively small.
Because of its scope.
Because of its scope.
And its place in the building itself, that it was high up in the building. Does that complicate things?
It does. Once you get above the 10th floor in a fire, it's almost impossible to fight a high-rise fire above the 10th floor, except by sending firefighters up there and using hose stands. Then you run into water pressure problems. I was just thinking about this not long after the World Trade Center bombing. The engineer who designed the World Trade Center told me that the World Trade Center was designed to withstand a 707 direct impact. Well, obviously, that wasn't the case.
It seems not. We are getting reports, and we are getting lots of reports, and we want to be careful to tell you when we have confirmed them and not. But we have a report that a 747 is down in Pennsylvania, and that remains unconfirmed at this point, and so we will check on that. I want to get back to the former commissioner in a moment, but again, to briefly recap, you have
calls down to friends, Lower Manhattan. The phones in the city are overloaded. Do not be surprised if you cannot get through.
Are pretty much all emergency workers. Many of them that I have seen in the last 2 to 3 minutes, quite frankly, are coming out of here. And remember this, these are professionals. They're coming out of there looking literally stunned, in shock, many of them, struggling for breath, obviously in serious distress. Breathing problems are the biggest problem for those who manage to make it safely out of that area down below us. You can't see much more than a block south of me right now. And the World Trade Center probably stands about 10 blocks south of where I am at this moment. And as you can see now, the dust is beginning to pick up here. It really depends on which way the wind blows as to whether or not we get heavy dust or not. But at this point, I can tell you that in the first few minutes, emergency workers were trying just basically to get out of there, to survive. You could see that written in their faces. The situation was so desperate, they just wanted to get out of there. Now, many of them are beginning to regroup. A couple of them asked me where their commander might be. They're trying to get together and go back in there and try to take care of the people who obviously are in serious trouble. There's no other way to describe it. The language here, at times, if I slip into language which seems a little melodramatic, forgive me, but this is a circumstance which is very, very difficult to describe in many ways without sounding melodramatic. Certainly in more than 20 years of covering horrific events, this is something that I've never seen before. As we say, the emergency workers now beginning to try to gather themselves. Over there you can see a police emergency service unit. They're trying basically now to reestablish some kind of a safe perimeter. And many of the emergency workers basically just happy to be alive. Certainly that picture tells it all. Many of them just happy to be alive at this point, having survived what is an extraordinary event, the collapse of 2 towers. As we said earlier in our report, 110 stories each. I will tell you that what fell, what I saw fall, had to be at least 40, 50 stories of that building at first. The skeleton was left at about, I would say, the 50th or 60th floor after the shell, after the structure of the building fell down. The skeleton, the steel skeleton, was literally sheaved off, and it took probably about another 30 seconds before the skeleton collapsed into the street. That was the last we saw of the World Trade Center, and that was maybe 10 minutes ago when that final skeleton, the metal skeleton, steel skeleton, collapsed into the street.
That was NBC's Pat Dawson again. He's standing about 10 blocks from where the World Trade Center towers used to stand. You're looking at the collapse of one of those towers right now. We now have an AP News alert out of Pittsburgh. Officials at Somerset County Airport are confirming the crash of a large plane just north of the airport. That's about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. Again, officials at Somerset County Airport confirm the crash of a large plane north of that airport, which is located about 80 miles to the southeast of the city of Pittsburgh. We do not know whether that crash of that plane is related to what has become an obvious terrorist attack both here in New York City and in Washington, D.C. at the Pentagon.
Matt, we just got a late word that State Department security officials are denying those reports of a car bomb at the State Department. Betsy Stewart is at the C Street entrance and also says there's no sign of a car bomb. Betsy Stewart is one of our producers who's very familiar with the State Department. The building has been evacuated. Top officials are still believed to be in the Operations Center, however. Those are highly secured areas in terms of penetration physically and otherwise. Colin Powell, as Andrea reported earlier, was headed for Lima, Peru, but he's done a U-turn and he's coming back. The president is on his way back. He'll have a National Security Council meeting, we think probably at around 11:30 or perhaps around noon. That is likely to take place either at Andrews Air Force Base or in some more secure location. The White House has been evacuated, especially with this report of another plane going down, this time in the Pittsburgh area. There were planes in the air when the order went out that there would be no more takeoffs, so we don't know how much more damage these terrorists had in mind.
Let's go to Bob Hager, who is, of course, NBC's aviation expert. Bob, what kind of information are you getting from your sources?
Not a lot, Katie, from the FAA. For instance, they are not talking about any possible hijacks. And normally they can tell when there's a hijack in progress because the pilot, the original pilot of the plane, has various buttons that he can push that set off a code and tell them that there were hijacks. But maybe as a matter of security, they're not saying anything about that. They did stop all takeoffs in the U.S. at 9:25 this morning, and then for pilots that were in the air, the question came up what to do about them, and they were given some discretion to continue on to their destination, so long as it was not the New York or Washington area. Or
as we speak to you now, there are a variety of reports, and it's important to try and put this in some kind of order, but the most important things to tell you if you're just joined in is that what has all the makings of an extraordinarily well-planned terrorist attack on both Washington and New York has taken place this morning. The trade centers here in New York, the 2 World Trade Center towers have collapsed after being hit by a plane. Maria Hinojosa joins us on the phone. She is in New York, down near the building. Maria, what can you tell us?
Well, I'm actually at St. Vincent's Hospital right now, where at about 45... Another incoming plane headed in the Washington region. But there was a very telling, dramatic moment just a second ago when a U.S. Air Force F-16 flew very low level, did a wide sweeping turn around the Pentagon and back over Washington. And as one Air Force officer standing near me said, "My God, they're now flying air cover over Washington." A very dramatic moment, a milestone in what Tom has already described as a declaration of war. Terrorist war against the U.S.
Let's go back and show you the pictures of Lower Manhattan, where the situation only gets worse, not better. That is the financial district of the world. It's also a residential area and a great commercial area. Both Twin Trade Tower buildings now have collapsed onto the ground. There is an untold loss of life. The ripple effect goes on with all the smoke and dust that is spread out across that very densely populated area. It goes down below ground as well as in the high-rise buildings there. There are many residential structures in that area as well. Some heroic rescue workers were down there trying to get people out of the building when the first building came down, and then the second building did as well. Without any sound, and looking at this, there is a kind of a surreal quality. But that is the epicenter of a great, great national tragedy and a great loss of life. No question about it this morning.
We're talking about people who were hurt, perhaps killed in this blast. Many of them have been brought to area hospitals, including St. Vincent's Hospital. Bob Bazell is there. Bob, what's
Several New York City streets have been closed. Major avenues have been closed off so that ambulances can continue to come in.
That is circling an airport in Northern Virginia. Not sure if it's Washington National Airport or Dulles Airport, which is now Reagan Airport. But that the authorities, of course, have a beat on that, but that we understand that that 767 out of Pittsburgh has been hijacked.
Let's refocus our attention, if we can, on the situation here in New York City. Lou Young joining us on the phone. Lou?
Well, we're just trying to get to City Hall a few moments ago. Walking down from Canal Street, everything, as you know, was completely blocked. Seas of people coming the other way, dumbfounded by the collapse of the first tower, and some of them covered with soot.
Stand by for a moment because we have this report from AP that I'm just simply going to read. A large plane crashed Tuesday morning just north of the Somerset County Airport, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. Airport officials said the plane, believed to be a Boeing 767, crashed around 10 a.m. about 8 miles east of Jennerstown, according to County 911 dispatchers, WPXI-TV reported. The crash came the same morning that terrorists crashed two planes into the World Trade Center in New York City, and the twin 110-story towers collapsed. Explosions also rocked the Pentagon and the State Department, although that was refuted moments ago, and spread fear across the nation. There was no other immediate details on the Pennsylvania crash, and it was not clear whether the crash was related to the others. Again, that was a report, a bulletin that was just issued by the Associated Press.
You know what is so stunning about all of this, Matt and Katie, is that there has been no indication whatsoever that this very carefully coordinated massive attack was going to occur. There's been a complete intelligence failure here. And there will be, obviously, down the road, a price to pay for that.
Well, that's actually not all that surprising, Tom, because we've often talked in the past following every terrorist event about how vulnerable the United States is, and many terrorist experts say how unprepared they are. And the question, of course, is, can you ever prepare for an attack like this?
Well, that's true, but we also have people out there who are enlisting posts, and we've penetrated these kinds of organizations, but to have this kind of an attack, this sophisticated, this efficient, striking at the heart of the nation's capital, striking at the heart of New York City. Now, and if this is true that this plane went down as a result of this attack, we don't know whether it's the end of it. Right. This is a massively well-coordinated attack of some kind that is nothing short but of a declaration of war on this country.
And terrorist experts are now saying, and intelligence experts are now saying, that there are very short or very few number of terrorist groups that are capable of this kind of planning, and a couple of names come to mind, and I'm not going to throw them out now because we certainly don't have any reports. Before I go to Jamie Gangel, I just want to say that some of the descriptions coming from eyewitnesses in Lower Manhattan of these explosions occurring are chilling. One man talked about getting off a PATH train, that's a subway train here in Lower Manhattan, and looking up at the building after the first explosion and seeing people jump out of the windows. We have no idea how high up, but hearing people on the ground scream each time another person jumped out of a window attempting to get to safety. And then when the second explosion occurred, he felt the heat of the explosion on the back of his neck. Jamie Gangel is our national correspondent. She's joining us now on the phone. Jamie?
Matt, you know, speaking of those intelligence officials that you were just mentioning, now finally we can no longer reach on the phone anyone at the CIA. Apparently the CIA has been evacuated. We know the National Security Agency, which is the electronic eavesdropping agency, which is south of Baltimore near Fort Meade, Maryland, that they have been shut down. What we're hearing from both places is that all non-essential personnel have been told to leave. And I can only imagine that probably they are trying to move some of their operations out of those buildings as well for backup procedure. But in addition to whatever intelligence was missed in all of this, we now have perhaps some problems gathering intelligence as those buildings are now being shut down.
Right, Jamie, thank you very much. Tom, let's go back and talk about something you mentioned a second ago, that it shows the enormity of this situation. In addition to what we assume will be horrendous loss of life, all planes in this country have been grounded. I mean, you think about the impact that has, and I mean, is there ever a time we can imagine something like that ever happening before?
The most powerful nation in the world, and national security officials and terrorist experts have been saying for some time, a small band of very willful and sophisticated people can bring us to a halt, and they have done just that. There's a psychological terror as a result of all of this, as you can only imagine how it plays out across the country today. People looking in who don't live in New York or live in the nation's capital are wondering what happens around me. It is hard to overstate the consequences of all of this, and this is just the beginning. We'll be living with this story and dealing with the consequences of it for some time. The United States will change as a result of all of this. We already thought that there was a lot of security in America at the airports and so on, and yet there was a successful hijacking at Boston Airport today, and the consequences of that we're seeing on the screen here this morning. So this is going to change this country profoundly in not just the coming days, but the coming months, to say nothing, as you have been saying, Matt, of the horrific loss of life that we're witnessing.
On that subject, you know, and Katie and Tom, to complete a thought I started before, you both were out at the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, a much smaller building, and it took rescue workers more than a week to find all the people trapped in that wreckage. We have a building here two buildings of each 110 stories. It's mind-boggling to think of what it's going to take over these next days and weeks to find survivors or victims of these explosions.
And of course, it continues to be a terrifying situation because there are a number of planes up in the air as this took place, and a number of unconfirmed and frightening reports about those planes that we heard earlier from Jim Miklashevsky, that somebody had gotten word at the Pentagon that perhaps there is another plane, whether they were talking about the one north of Pittsburgh or it's completely unclear. And it's also unclear whether these planes that were en route to a destination have been grounded themselves. In other words, that there were emergency landings or what. I think it's very difficult to get any communication with airports all across the country because they're, I'm sure, completely chaotic.
Katie, you know from your time in Oklahoma City and all the time that you spent with the victims there,
A man earlier this morning, he was inside the tower.
What happened? I was up on in my office on the northwest corner of the 82nd floor. I heard a noise like a sonic boom almost, and then a blast. The building swayed, shook a little bit. I saw papers coming fly out of the middle of the building, and then we went to the staircase to try to get down. We were going down. We got stuck on one floor because the door and the staircase wouldn't even open. So we went back onto the floor through some fire. We saw some fire and rubbish, and we went to the other staircase to come down. We made it all the way downstairs, And then when we were just about to come out of the building, there was another blast, and all the lights went out, and this is what happened then.
The glass came down?
We didn't see we were still inside the building. All we heard was a big blast, and the whole volume of air moved. And we came out through the subway.
Well, good to see you. What are your injuries? Have they told you?
The only thing I have is I have a little cut on my hand. That's about it. So I was real lucky. I don't know what happened to the people behind me when that blast occurred. Okay.
Thank you.
That is an incredibly revealing interview, that man who was a survivor on the 82nd floor of the 110th floor World Trade Center. What's incredible about that is that he was almost on the way down after the blast at 8:45 this morning, when the second plane, 18 minutes later, he heard that explosion. You heard him say they heard a second explosion. Of course, he didn't know what it was at the time. We know it was the second plane.
Yes.
That means he got out. People on almost the top of the building, Jim, got out in those 15 minutes.
It's so important because, again, the building is 110, each of the buildings is 110 floors high. What we've been wondering all day long, what I've been keeping track of, is how high have we heard from people?
Yes. This is the highest.
And this is the highest. 82nd floor, and he got out in 15 minutes. And why that's so important is because it means a lot of people got out of that building. This is undoubtedly a terrible explosion, no doubt about that. But a lot of people got out of there safely. This is a guy who was on the 82nd floor, and apparently he suffered some minor hand injuries, and he was able to get out safely. Again, he was worrying about the people who were behind him. But very important that a guy who was on the 82nd floor was able to get out safely.
And not only that, but he had some downtime there, Jim and Sandra, because he tried to get to that one exit. It was locked. He couldn't do it. He had to run across the other side of the building, and then he went down. There are 50,000 people. There were 50,000 people who worked in those buildings. And we don't know how many are hurt or perhaps dead.
Reread it now.
From the building as well before the collapse came. Having said that, we still don't know how many people were killed in just simply the impact itself or on board the planes. The 767 that was hijacked from Boston that crashed first, we have no word yet on what was on that plane, but one can only assume that on a morning flight on a Tuesday morning that it was filled with travelers.
We have an eyewitness on the phone with us right now. His name is Jeremy Fox. Jeremy, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Tell me where you were.
Would I had the opportunity to walk close down to the towers. When they were on fire, we could see the gray smoke coming out of them, the big holes on each side of the towers. We were pushed back by a police officer. He told us not to stand on Trinity Street any longer. And when he told us that, a few minutes later, all of a sudden we heard the earth shake. We heard this rumbling noise. We looked up into the sky. Now just go ahead and understand this. We looked up into the sky and we saw this gray cloud, a huge gray cloud full of debris coming at us, standing about 30 stories tall. It kept rolling and rolling toward us, and then all of a sudden when we realized it, we had to get on the run and get out of there. We were right in the way of that plume of smoke coming at us, and then we ran into a store. At the moment we ran into the store, we closed the door behind us. All of a sudden the sky went pitch black and gray. We realized that the first tower had gone down at that point in time. A rather spectacular scene. It looks like a nuclear winter down here, and the entire area around City Hall, all the dust and debris. You might be able to see some of it in front of me. That dust and debris is coming from the World Trade Center. We are now about 10 blocks from it. You might be able to see behind us the smoke still coming from what was the World Trade Center. People have been leaving this area in droves. They have been running from the area. I saw a lot of people that were in the tower. They came out, they talked to us, they described what it felt like when the plane initially hit the first tower. They said there was a shaking, a rumbling, and then some people talked about the fact that they ran down the stairs. They said one of the exits didn't actually work, so they had to go to another one, and that's how they were finally able to get out of the building. But people were moving. The cops have been out here telling the people to keep moving. We got a police officer right down here working one of the courts officers. Any officer that is down here, whether they work for the courts, whether they work for transit, whoever they work for, they are extremely busy. We had an opportunity to go ahead and talk to some of the other folks out here. Once again, you could see the debris field coming down. It was absolutely incredible. It was hard to believe that something like this could happen. It actually, we thought it was almost like a movie. It was almost impossible to imagine something like this happening. It is absolutely an incredible scene down here near the World Trade Center. We feel very fortunate that that police officer, who was a member of the Port Authority police force, told us to get out of the area. He was absolutely right, because a few minutes later, that's when that first tower started crumbling down to the ground. We have no reports on any injuries. Police activity down here has been heavy. Ambulance crews keep coming in here. But I got to tell you, 5 blocks from where we are right now, you couldn't believe the scene. The dust and the smoke and debris on the ground is a couple of inches thick. It looks like snow, and if you look over at the World Trade Center or where it used to be, they are all gone. There is no more World Trade Center. The top of those towers are absolutely gone. They're still telling anybody in this area to get out of the way. If you see our signal, please be wise, move out of the way, head home. A lot of the subways in this area have been shut down. They have told the people to go ahead and go home as quickly as you possibly can. It has been shocking. I can't believe what we have seen out here. They're still running some more pictures. As you can see, it was an incredible scene. We saw people that just ran out of their shoes, out of their house, and when the debris came down, a lot of people were caught outside. The smoke got into their system. They were coughing, having a tough time breathing. We talked to a lot of emergency personnel that were down there. A Red Cross man, he had run into the restaurant where we were. He was actually down there and luckily was able to escape. He was covered with gray soot and debris. We've seen a lot of people. We've also seen a number of people who did make it out. They wanted to somehow let their relatives know that they are all right. But of course, with this tragedy that we've seen at the World Trade Center today, you have to imagine that some people probably did not make it out all right. 2 planes apparently crashed into each tower of the World Trade Center this morning around 9 o'clock this morning. There's a police officer, as you can see in this picture. He was telling people to move out of the way, go to the ambulances, which were stationed right down the street. A couple of those guys came to us and asked us, were we okay? Now, our clothes are covered with gray soot. We have been out here all morning long. Like I say, we were down there when that first tower came down. It was incredible. It was unimaginable. It was hard to believe. And luckily, a whole lot of people were able to get out of the tower. Even some people who said they were above the crash line where the crash actually took place on the World Trade Center. Many of those people said they heard it, they felt it, they were able to get away. But unquestionably, a lot of people were not able to make it out alive. Let's take a live scene again of what it looks like here in downtown. You see that gray plume of smoke that is up in the air. It is covered all of lower Manhattan from City Hall southward, as we could imagine, southward is covered by dust. I'm talking about a thick gray soot, plenty of debris. It is an incredible sight. It is still smoking. Police officers are everywhere directing traffic, trying to move people through. We are just absolutely stunned and amazed by what has happened out here today. All of lower New York is clearing out. People are rushing from the scene. This has been an absolutely incredible event. We cannot believe that we have witnessed what has happened here today. It started all around 9 o'clock this morning when that first plane crashed into the tower, and then the second plane crashed into the tower. It has been chaos and bedlam down here ever since. Live in Lower Manhattan, I'm Anthony Johnson, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
Anthony, thank you. We cannot, ladies and gentlemen, talk to Anthony. Our communication systems is limited because of the collapse of the World Trade Center. Our broadcast towers are up there. If you're just joining us this morning, you're looking at what once was the world.
In fact, on any country in the world, so far as we can tell. The untold loss of life in New York alone. We only know that there have been hundreds of burn victims brought to
New York, named Brendan Duke, wherever he is, got me through smoke that neither one of us could see more than about a foot ahead of us. There are still people in there, excuse me, I've breathed a fair amount of soot. The personnel, the police and the fire working in there are doing so again.
Situation, and all that I can tell them is that every resource that we have is attempting to rescue as many people as possible. And the end result is going to be some horrendous number of lives lost. I don't think we know yet. But right now, we have to just focus on saving as many people as possible.
Can you give us a sense of if there is, in fact, some system being implemented, what that system is, and where people are being...
Rumble like I've never heard before, and a firefighter ran towards me. We ran as fast as we could. I lost my shoes. I fell down. He picked me up and slammed me into a wall and covered me with him until we could make it more to safety.
Was this from the first rolling blast or the second?
John, I looked at my watch. It was about 10:44 is what my watch said. So it was after the second, I think, the second tower explosion.
All right, Carol Marin from CBS 60 Minutes. I'm John Slattery, back to the studio.
All right, John, thank you.
We're going to go to Marcia Kramer now. She's got another update for us. Marcia?
Well, you know, we're trying to keep track of those 8 hijacked planes. We now have word that one of those planes may be in the area near Dulles Airport. Again, one of those hijacked planes may be in the air near Dulles Airport. We seem to have been able to account for a total of 5 of the planes. There's the one that's in the air right now near Dulles. There's one that we now have unconfirmed reports that crashed near Somerset County Airport in western Pennsylvania. And there are the 3 that have struck American targets, 2 at the World Trade Center and 1 in Washington at the Pentagon. That's 5. The question is, where are the other 3 planes and where are they headed? Again, we do have a report that one of the 8 planes that have been hijacked is on its way somewhere near Dulles Airport, some target in the Texas area. Back to you, Lisa and Michael.
Okay.
Marcia, thank you. Just to quickly recap, if you're just now joining us, you're looking at live pictures
on the left side of your screen
of a scene that cannot be described. The World Trade Centers hit by hijacked planes, exploding, collapsing. You're looking at crews as they scramble to help anybody at all. 50,000 people work at the trade centers. 200,000, Michael O'Looney reporting, move through that area every day. And we spoke a moment ago with John Slattery, who is just north of the Trade Center site at West Street in Murray.
Airplanes that are unaccounted for. So there were some rumors that there might have been other planes hijacked that we didn't yet know the outcome of it. And now the FAA is confirming that. There are several, is the word I heard, several planes that are unaccounted for that were evidently hijacked and has not come to a conclusion yet.
Bob, we'd like you to get a list of as many of those as you can, as specifically as possible. We're going to show you now, we're going to replay a tape of the second attack on the World Trade Centers in slow-mo. There's the plane. As you can see, a large airline-type plane. And now the collision. Flown deliberately into the second one.
When they say several, Bob, do they give you any indication of what they're talking about?
Several is the description that I had, and that was just passed on to me a moment ago, so I wasn't talking personally to the FAA person, but several is the account I had.
And Bob, American Airlines, the Flight 11 out of Boston, do we know what exactly kind of plane that was and perhaps how many people were on board?
We do not yet, but I think we're going to get some additional information from American. They were supposed to be adding comment to this from Dulles Airport here in a few moments, so we might learn a little bit more about that. But right now, it's very important to worry about rumors and so forth. I'd like to hear some more confirmation that a plane really has crashed in Pennsylvania, for instance, since the FAA hasn't confirmed that. But I think one needs to be very careful here in this chaotic situation.
We have a report here that Osama bin Laden, who is often identified as the world's leading terrorist, warned 3 weeks ago that he and his followers would carry out an unprecedented attack on U.S. interest for its support of Israel, an Arab journalist with access said to him Tuesday in London.
Abdel Bari Atwan, editor of the London-based Al-Qud Al-Arabi newspaper, said Islamic fundamentalists led by bin Laden was almost certainly behind the attack of the World Trade Center in New York. Quote, it's most likely the work of Islamic fundamentalists. Osama bin Laden warned 3 weeks ago that he would attack American interest in an unprecedented attack, a very big one, Atwan told Reuters.
He has interviewed bin Laden, and he maintains close contact with his followers, according to Reuters. So that's the first report that we've had that Osama bin Laden may have been responsible. Obviously, it was a very sophisticated organization, carefully coordinated. It had to have its origins in this country. Louis Freeh, the FBI director, as he left office, said that his continuing great concern with the number of terrorist cells that exist in America, not just in some shadowy enclave in Afghanistan or somewhere in the subcontinent, but they've taken root in this country because it's so easy to get here.
Let's talk a little bit more about Osama bin Laden, because as you say, he was associated with the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. Why don't we talk about him and what he has done here in the United States, Tom, to give people a little bit of background?
Well, he is from Saudi Arabia originally. He's wealthy. He is very sophisticated in terms of using the new technology. We believe that he is being harbored in Afghanistan. No one knows for sure. A number of people have attempted to get to him and have been unsuccessful in that. They also believe that he was behind the bombings in Kenya as well. He is obviously a zealot of great, dark passion, and most of it directed at the United States.
Brian Jenkins, our terrorist expert, remains on the phone. Brian, tell us a little bit more about Osama bin Laden, and if you think that he might, in fact, have carried out this kind of well-orchestrated, horrific attack on the United States.
Well, certainly he would have to be included in any very, very short list of suspects, but it is premature to...
Vehicles. I can't hear you that well right now. I'm going to try to take this here and send it back to you. We don't have a link with you, but we will come back in a couple of minutes and exactly let you know the latest. But again, no word right now on injuries or fatalities at the scene. But the FBI now reporting to Channel 7 Eyewitness News that National Guard has jets in the air. This is a no-fly zone at this point. So if they see any jets that are unidentified, those jets are armed from the National Guard. That is what the FBI is telling us right now.
Okay, Jeff, thank you. It looks, and Jeff, you just heard Jeff report that there was sounds of another explosion. That looks like new smoke, not dust, rising from there.
That is definitely, certainly a deeper color smoke. In fact, you can see the differentiation between what appears to be a dust cloud and this fresh smoke. We have not...
His skin was all off. I helped him out. This is him all over. There's people jumping out of windows. I've seen at least 14 people jumping out of windows. It's horrific. I can't believe this is happening.
Anything else that you saw? Were you there for the second hit by the plane?
About 10 minutes later, the second building went off.
Did you see it?
Yes, I saw it. It just blew up. A big explosion. People started running. It was just chaos everywhere. Yes, I was right there. I was down in the basement. Came down. All of a sudden, the elevator blew up. Smoke. I dragged the guy out. His skin was hanging off, and I dragged him out, and I helped him out of to the ambulance.
Thank
The words of some of the witnesses here in Manhattan this morning, and the pictures of what will, I suspect, before this is over, go down as one of the most horrific days in our lifetime. We're joined by our colleague, CNN's Jeff Greenfield.
Aaron, you know what? In 1993, when terrorists bombed the World Trade Center, their plan was to knock one of the towers into the other, bringing them both down. That disaster was averted, and bad as that was, in a sense, America was lucky. Another terrorist attack in the planning was interrupted to blow up the Lincoln Tunnel and submerge dozens, maybe hundreds of people. At the eve of the millennium, a suspected terrorist, was intercepted, you remember, at the Canadian border on his way to Seattle. And I know that not so long ago, former President Clinton, in a private talk to a group, ruminated on how lucky the United States has been over the years with the combination of luck and the skill of anti-terrorist people, to avoid such things. What we are seeing now is nothing less than the worst nightmare that one could imagine come to life, probably worse than anyone could have imagined. You may remember that Tom Clancy wrote a novel that ends with a terrorist hijacker crashing into the Capitol. The worst act of terrorist violence on American soil, the Oklahoma City bombing, killed fewer than 200 people. All we know today is that tens of thousands of people worked in that complex that has been destroyed. And I hate to say it this way, but this may be the day that America's luck ran out.
Well, it is hard, isn't it? I mean, you look out here and you see the Statue of Liberty to the right and these buildings off to the left, the attacks on Washington. We don't know a lot about who's behind this or what this is all about, but the symbolism of these attacks is extraordinary. CNN's David Ensor is in Washington, and he joins us. David?
Aaron, I'm talking to U.S. officials who are obviously working on who's responsible for this. Their working thesis is that this is overseas terrorism, not domestic. They say they cannot rule out additional attacks yet to come. In terms of claims of responsibility so far, there is an Agence France-Presse report in which a group with the word Palestine in the name claims responsibility. There is also a report quoting personnel close to Osama bin Laden, the fugitive Saudi accused terrorist, denying that that group was involved. But again, U.S. officials say they can't shed any light on whether these reports are correct or incorrect. Usually when this kind of attack occurs, you have claims of responsibility from all sorts of people who had nothing to do with it, so it's a very fluid situation at this point. But the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States has been evacuated from its headquarters in Langley, Virginia. There are some key personnel still in the headquarters, but the operations center has been moved elsewhere. U.S. officials saying they don't want to talk about where exactly the headquarters staff and operations staff has been moved to. But that staff is focusing now on trying to find any shred of information that could help the U.S. government figure out who is doing this and how to put a stop to it. Aaron?
David, you tell me if I'm right or wrong here. As a practical matter, there are not a whole lot of groups that the United States government knows about that are sophisticated enough, have the kind of money, the resources to pull off something like this. Fair enough?
That's absolutely true, and obviously, despite the denial, attention will quickly turn to the bin Laden group because it has long tentacles. It has connections with all sorts of other groups. We saw at the Millennium a group of Algerians apparently involved in trying to arrange bombings in the United States, and now there is evidence being produced in court sessions that those Algerians were working for the bin Laden group. So that group certainly will come under immediate suspicion. There are very few others that could have pulled this off. Aaron?
Right, I mean, just because of the enormity of it all and the sophistication required to stage these multiple attacks, this is not something some small cell can pull off. This is obviously a group or groups, well-financed and extraordinarily well-organized.
That's correct. Now, another thing you'll notice is that you remember the attack on the USS Cole in the Yemen harbor. That was the first time that kind of an attack using small boats with bombs in them had been used against an American warship. It worked once. Now the U.S. Navy has taken steps to make that much more difficult to do. Officials saying this may work once. They will now have to take measures to try to make sure that this kind of thing can't be done again. But these are apparently hijackings of civilian aircraft. So it was a sort of modus operandi that was dreamed up in some evil terrorist's mind and done on a massive scale here today, Aaron.
Pennsylvania, Somerset County Airport. We were reporting earlier that it was a 767. Later reports are that it is a 747, and we didn't know at the time and still don't whether it is related in any way to what we have seen in Washington and in New York City today. But we do know that we are being told that that plane either came out of New York or Cleveland and was bound for Chicago. Again, these stories are unfolding slowly. We will get more information as it becomes available, but right now that 747 that crashed near the Somerset County Airport, we aren't sure whether it was on its way trying to land at the Somerset County Airport, which really isn't big enough to handle a 747. It is the largest plane in the air. The 747 is the largest plane in the air right now.
And of course, we were told, and this has been the case almost for 2 hours, all airports in the United States have been closed for takeoffs, and all planes in the air at the time were told to land at the nearest airport. And we are assuming, although we don't know for sure, that might have been what this plane was doing.
And we have no... We've got reporters all over Lower Manhattan at this point in time. Michelle Charlesworth has been on the West Side Highway with the towers behind her for much of the morning. She is live there now.
We have no way to communicate with you except you can hear us. We can't hear you. Our cell phones haven't worked for about an hour and a half. We are about 30 blocks from Ground Zero, beneath the World Trade Center. Behind me, what used to be the World Trade Center, the two towers now gone, and the smoke changing color every second. One of the people who was down below, Michael Walters, who was a photojournalist.
Injuries or worse when the buildings did come down. This is tantamount to war. You're looking at the lower end of Manhattan. A plane has attacked the Pentagon this morning as well. There is a report of a hijacked plane that went down near Pittsburgh. NBC's Robert Hager is tracking all of this through the FAA for us. Robert?
Well, there's some more information now on the one confirmed hijacking that we know of, and that was that American Airlines flight number 11. It was a 767, took off from Boston Logan this morning. It was to go to Los Angeles. American Airlines confirmed it was hijacked, and we have some first numbers on how many were on board. 58 passengers and a crew of 11, so 69 people on that flight. That's presumed to be one of the planes that went into one of the towers of the World Trade Center. The other planes that we know of, the other tower of the World Trade Center and the plane that went that crashed into the Pentagon area, those are unknown flights. The Pennsylvania crash, which is still not the FAA, but it's local authorities saying it. Our affiliate in Pittsburgh has heard traffic on the radio scanners saying that it was a flight that originated in Chicago and was headed to Cleveland, but I'd caution that that sort of information coming off radio scanners is very, very sketchy and so very unreliable. But it's the first report off the scanners.
Bob, an FBI spokesman is quoted as saying that there were 4 flights that were hijacked altogether. We know about American 11. I'm not going to mention